Welcome to the Miami Jewish Film Festival, the largest festival of its kind. We want to thank all our members, our sponsors, the community partners, all of you film lovers, and especially our presenting sponsors, the Center for the Advancement of Jewish Education and the Greater Miami Jewish Federation, for their continued support throughout all these years. My name is Merle Saferstein. I'm a legacy educator, and I'm excited to be moderating a virtual conversation with director Amiel Courtin-Wilson from the documentary Man on Earth, which is premiering at this year's film festival. Thank you all for joining us. So Amiel, can you tell us about yourself, where you're from, how long you've been directing, how you got into the film business, please?
Absolutely. And yeah, firstly, also thank you so much for having us. It's a real joy to be part of this program. And yeah, thanks for this chat. I've been making films for professionally 25 years. So I started, my first experience was actually making a documentary, like a video diary documentary for Australia's equivalent of PBS when I was in my last year of high school. So it was very interesting. For my first documentary experience was actually being sort of filmmaker and subject at the same time. And I think it set up a very strong set of parameters around the ethics of the filmmaker subject relationship, and have tried to be with my documentaries since then. I also make narrative feature films and work in video installation, so sort of do museum work and things like this. But I keep coming back to documentary. I've worked, my first film was about a Buddhist nun teaching Buddhism to death row inmates around the United States. I tend to make portrait films, so about individuals, sometimes following them for years, and I think the longest is 10 years. And other times, in the case of Man on Earth, it's 7 days. So portrait, longitudinal or observational docs seem to be the main form I keep returning to.
Thank you. So can you tell us about the subject of the documentary, about Robert himself?
Absolutely. So we have been researching another project that's yet to come out, a project called Traces, which is a film that's shot entirely with thermal imaging cameras. And as part of that project, we started researching death doulas and various hospices and doctors all around the world. So we spent about a year reaching out to a whole range of institutions and individuals. And it was through that research that Bob actually heard about this other project. And he contacted us, and the entire film was actually his idea. So he instigated the film. We had a phone call in January of 2019, and he basically said, "I'd like to participate in this other thermal project that you're working on, but in exchange, I'd like you to record the last 7 days of my life." So I think it was the fact that he was really, he instigated the film. Otherwise, I don't think I would have ever made this film. I don't think I would have ever asked that of a family. But it was because he was really driving the process, and he wanted to leave something behind, and I think in that way too, the film was even more of a collaboration than the usual filmmaker documentary subject relationship.
And did you come to the United States to do the film, to produce it?
Yeah, so it was a very fast turnaround. We had the first phone call with Bob in January of 2019, and he'd set the date of his death for the end of February. So we only had around 3 weeks to pull together the financing, the crew. Thankfully, because I've been at this for over 20 years now, I have like a wonderful selection of really good friends who I trust, especially with the sensitivity of this subject matter, that we could call on. So a wonderful cinematographer, Jacqueline Fitzgerald, amazing sound recorder, Stephen Bond, and then the producer, Alice Jamison Dowd. So it was not a tiny crew for documentary, but certainly a large crew to have in your home during such a sensitive period. So it was really paramount importance for us that we found people who would be very, very sensitive and and know when to slip into the shadows and to not have their, their presence felt.
So were you at his home the whole time? Did you actually stay in his home?
And initially we spoke about that being a possibility, but it was pretty evident pretty quickly that that would have just been way too much. So we had an Airbnb a couple of minutes from Jesse and Bob's house. And I should also say at this point, it's important to state that, usually with a documentary, the filmmakers get the subjects to sign waivers, and they sign release forms that are pretty, watertight in terms of permissions. And it just didn't feel right to do that in the case of this film. So we negotiated something with Jesse, Bob's son, and Bob himself, that Jesse would only give final permission for the film to be released once he saw a final edit. And that made the entire process, I mean, it just felt right. I think, it would have been, because obviously Jesse was very compromised with stress and with what he was going through as well. And so to make him make a decision and hold something that he might not be happy with afterwards just seemed, I mean, in short, kind of exploitative. So we waited a year after Bob had passed, and then we returned to Aberdeen and we spread Bob's ashes together, and Jesse saw an edit of the film, and it was then that he gave permission. So that was that also, I think, was like a key part of the framework in terms of, why we felt okay to make this film.
It was so sensitive of you, and really, really special that you, and also that you waited the year so that they had some time to just get some distance from the loss before you did that. That was beautiful, really. So I imagine, like an author who writes a book, you must have thought about the audience from the start. So who do you imagine will be drawn to this film, and why?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think it's obviously it's a difficult, very difficult film, and I mean the personal reason for heading towards this subject matter initially was I lost my stepmother in 2013, and I saw certain family members, really ill-equipped, I would say, to deal with the grieving process. And it was at that point that it really struck me that we really aren't making the best progress in terms of how we deal with mortality, how we speak about death, how we prepare for death. Certainly people without any religion, it's even more, can be even more fraught. So that was the initial reasoning. But I think, so in some ways, the audience, I would hope, is as broad as possible. But, it's clearly, well, from the screenings we've had already with certain festivals, what's wonderful to see is people are really using the film like a tool. So it's either people who've just lost someone, or might be someone who's in the process of beginning to be a caregiver for a close family member. And then there's also been, I was personally have been really pleasantly surprised at how many young people have been attending previous screenings, and seeing that, I think there is a real hunger there to understand what is so taboo in so much of society. So it's just a matter of getting people over that hurdle of getting them in the cinema in the first place, I think.
I've worked with death and dying for a long time. I've done a lot of hospice work and have worked with children who have lost their loved ones. And it really, people need the tools. People need to have the tools to deal with it. And so I think that's beautiful that in the way that you're doing that, it makes a big sense, a lot of sense. So what was it like to be such an intimate part of watching someone prepare to die?
Yeah, that another really great question. I think as much as we tried to prepare, by having crew members who were very dear friends, and I think there was nothing that really could prepare me for the intensity of the experience. It was only the second person that I'd been in the room with when they passed. So the first being my stepmother. And in some ways, making the film, there was a very strange experience when we premiered the film in the UK last year. And it was suddenly, I was watching the death of my friend in front of, in a room full of strangers. And there was this very strange delayed grieving process that happened after that screening. I think somehow making the film was keeping him alive in my mind. And I hadn't quite sort of, and I only knew Bob for 7 days. So obviously, but we did become very, very close in that period. So I would say I tried to prepare. It was far more intense than I imagined. And I'd be lying if I didn't say I was still unpacking what I learned from the making of that film. And I think I'll carry it with me forever.
Absolutely. Were you basically in the room with him like all the time? Did you, I know there, you chose certain parts, but did you spend like all day, all evening till he went to sleep with him?
Yeah, so because Bob in many ways was kind of leading the show, he comes from like a management background in many roles. So we would have these great debriefs at the end of each day where he would criticize my interview style and say I was being too polite and I should just get to the point. And but I think because of that, we really impressed it upon him that, if he needed us to leave, we would. And if anything, the issue was the inverse. Bob, I think, was so excited about telling his story that the first day he pushed himself too hard. And we realized very quickly, I think we filmed for 8 hours on the first day. And then we maybe only filmed for 2 hours the next day. And in total, I think of the 7 days, we were with Bob around 50% of the time. So not all that long. And to give you a sense of how close we became, I think by the third day, Jesse said, "Can you just put your cameras down and can we just all go have dinner together?" So we just as a way to bond even further, which was really so touching and such a blessing. Yeah, so it was kind of hour to hour, but in total about 50% of the 7 days. Yeah.
And did the other crew members ask him questions as well? Were they equally as involved in the process?
I think you're very intuitive with that question. Absolutely, they all did, and I think I've never felt such pressure. It was like starting to make films all over again because you had, such a finite period of time to get things right in terms of the line of questioning. And so I made it very clear to the rest of the crew that if they wanted to ask a question or if something, occurred to them, just to yell out. So yeah, sound recordist, cinematographer would all ask questions. And to give you a sense of how generous Bob was, he found out that our sound recordist, his father was also terminally ill. So Bob took time out to call him on Zoom and to tell, our sound recordist father how good a sound recordist he was, how proud he should be.
Wow.
Which still sort of almost brings tears to my eyes. But it really was an experience like no other because the intimacy was so accelerated. And you can tell in that last hour after Bob takes the medication that the camera shakes a little bit, and it's from Jacqueline sobbing uncontrollably, and I was having to wipe Steve's nose while he was holding the boom pole. And so yeah, we all fell in love with him equally, I think.
I noticed that there were some very close-up scenes and you could see the hairs on his nose. You could just really see his features so closely. And that to me kind of represented the intimacy of what you were doing and what you were trying to do. You really brought us right to this man in a way that otherwise we would not have seen him. And that was pretty amazing. There were some scenes that were really painful, like when he was so angry and got very frustrated and was yelling, or when he was talking to his other son, and it was just so tender and difficult, and the crying. And I wondered how that was for you to be part of all that.
Yeah, that's absolutely. I think, Bob is a frustrated performer in his life. He spoke about wanting to be an actor or a stand-up comedian. I think you can kind of see it in his personality a little bit. And so obviously, with anything, when, a camera is present, there's a degree of performativity, and people are, they're different when a camera's there. And I think that moment when Bob really collapses, and when he's speaking to his son Quentin, while it is, some people have some issues with us including that moment in the film, we did try the edit without that moment, and it just seemed like Bob was really putting on a brave face for so much of that period. And I think if we didn't show him really kind of cracking open and feeling that emotion, it just felt equally disingenuous to not include it. I should also say that his two doctors were just out of frame in that moment. And so when he collapsed, they were actually like stroking his leg. And I think if they weren't there, we would have absolutely stepped in and given him a hug, basically. So I do feel like I need to qualify that moment sometimes, because it feels maybe counter to the relationship we had to not step in and comfort him. So but certainly some of the most difficult moments I've ever committed to film, certainly. Yeah.
And also so important. I mean, to me, that was a moment that really showed the pain. I mean, the decision he made to end his life and then to say goodbye in that way. And I was struck by Jesse, because how he talked about, that he's not emotional, and yet you could just see, and what a devoted son, and how he was there to give medicine every half hour or whatever it was. It was pretty incredible, really. Yeah.
Yeah, he's really the unsung. I mean, he's such an angel of a human being, and exactly, you do see him go on this massive character arc from saying he's not emotional to really being Bob's kind of rocket in that moment. Yeah.
So in a different vein, just about the film, the filming and the videography itself. So there were a lot of scenes that were in fog or with gray, dark days. And I'm wondering whether this was all natural in that week, or did you specifically choose those moments for effect?
Yeah, so it was all natural. It was winter in Aberdeen, and so in the Pacific Northwest, and Bob just happened to live in this unbelievably atmospheric and liminal kind of space. It really felt, again, just like a gift in terms of the storytelling. The town itself it has this very strong feeling of being outside of time almost, and the fog swallowing up the landscape. We did the color grading of the imagery. We certainly enhanced that, so it does have a very sort of desaturated palette. And but we were very lucky to, we worked with really beautiful camera and lenses. So ostensibly the same kind of camera and lenses as you would shoot a narrative feature film with. So it was important that visually, because I knew that we would be stuck in one room for a lot of the time, that we have as beautiful a visual palette as possible, and hence also those moments in the film where we really step into Bob's, whether it's his nightmare or that fear of falling, or because his condition with his Parkinson's, he was hallucinating, and his sense of time was also very, very warped. So hence the use of slow motion and these moments that sort of drift and bleed a little bit away from reality were part of the overall plan.
And the hallucination is also part of the Lewy body disease, isn't it? I mean, it's because I know my cousin had that, and I watched how he was hallucinating, and it was just, it's hard to watch. What about the music? Did you who chose the music, and how did you decide on that?
Yeah, so the composers it's a number of composers. There's a wonderful French composer who Nicolas Becker, who won an Academy Award for the film Sound of Metal. He contributed some of the score. I actually did a little bit of the score with my father, I think because it felt right. There's something about fathers and sons in the film. So And so this sort of like a delicate kind of naive score, something a little bit kind of broken about the sound. And then obviously you have um the House of the Rising Sun song, which audiences still believe I added later, but it did just come on by chance when Jesse put on Amazon 60s hits. So and to be honest, that's also a reason why the release of the film was delayed a little bit, because the initial quote we got for the rights to that, very iconic track was in the realm of $150,000 US.
Oh.
Even though it happened naturally and it's a documentary, so we negotiated for a good 15 months before we got it down to around, I think, like 7,000. So took a long time, but we got there.
That is a lot. And you ended with the scene where there was snow, and I wondered about that, why you chose that scene to end the film.
Yeah, I'm so happy that you bring that up. That was literally we left Bob's home after he had passed, and we drove to our Airbnb. We were sitting in the car outside our rental, and it began to snow maybe half an hour after Bob had died. And Jacqueline still had the camera in her lap, so I just asked her to flip the camera around and shoot through the passenger window, so it was steamed up. And there was just, I think there's something really beautiful about this. It hadn't snowed the entire week we were there. Half an hour after Bob had died, it began to snow. And it's also, I think, a moment. So it's literally the next thing that happened chronologically, but it's also a moment for the audience to land a little more gently. I think if you just cut to black from that close up, which we did try, it felt too harsh, and it seemed like the right thing to do, just to, whatever your belief system is, transference of energy, heaven, etc. This idea of that the world continues and that Bob will continue in the world, I think.
Yeah, I thought it was lovely, and I appreciated it. It was kind of, I needed that, I think, just those few
Yeah.
moments. Yeah.
Thank
And I noticed that you chose that there were some photos of Robert and his family, and I know that in the legacy work I do, when people do their legacy videos, very often they will choose photos. So I'm wondering who chose them, whether Robert chose them, Bob chose them, and how, and if you have anything to say about that.
Yeah, absolutely. Look, because Bob had, I'll say like a complicated, series of relationships and marriages and certain estranged family members. There weren't as many photos from his previous marriages as we'd hoped. So, that selection is probably 60% of the photos we were able to salvage. He was just someone, for whatever reason, didn't keep photos. Um, and then the home video that you see, that very brief fragment of home video, that after, again, about a year of trying, we actually found there was a fragment on a family friend's home video where Bob just happened to appear. So that 40 seconds is literally the only 40 seconds we could find. He'd apparently, worked he'd done like in-house training videos for various corporations he'd worked for that we tried desperately to find, which would have been hilarious to see Bob in the 80s doing that kind of work. But yeah, it was quite thin on the ground. So the decision was kind of made for us.
But they were great. It was a nice extra piece to have that. So one of the questions I want to ask you is, what did you actually learn from this experience? What was your, when you walked away, what did you feel?
Yeah, I think it's mirrored in the audience response to the film. I think it's similar for me. I really learned the profound lesson to have more gratitude, to realize, how precious each day is, to try to heal relationships that, may have been broken in my own life. And I think, some of the most beautiful correspondence we've gotten from audiences is just that, the sort of a nourishing sense of trying to lead your life with higher degree of urgency, I think. In terms of death itself, I think it's interesting. It's like as you get closer to death, it feels it moves further away along the horizon. So it's this one of these strange paradoxes that, as you think about it more, it sort of it remains somewhat abstract, and yet you know it more in your body. It's a paradox. I'm not sure I can fully articulate, but maybe you shouldn't be able to either.
So the other question I was going to ask you is, what did you hope that the audience would take away? Did you think about that as you were filming?
Yeah, I mean, it was twofold. You know, I tend to be drawn to people that I'd like to be friends with anyway when I make a film. You know, I'm not so interested in, you know, I would never make a film that's like a character assassination. It's not interesting to me. It's there are other filmmakers to make that kind of work. So I suppose I'd like an audience to fall in love with Bob a little bit. Not everyone loves Bob. Some people, he's a bit much for some people, which is fine. But I love them to fall in love with Bob, and also, yeah, just to be just that a little bit more present, I suppose, in integrating thinking about in your life to maybe help you live life, I suppose. Yeah, I know it's a big ask, but that's what I would hope.
It is a big ask. And what were the doctors like that were there? They seemed, I mean, that woman seemed so kind and special. So what was that like to see them interact with him, with Bob?
Yeah, no, she was really remarkable, actually. We've screened it to a number of other people, and who do similar work, and they've all commented on how wonderfully she handled herself, and she was a marvel. He did have another doctor, like sort of a general practitioner, a GP who didn't want to be on camera, but that was more to do with some of her clients being opposed to this, so not wanting to sort of broadcast the fact that she did this kind of work in the community, which is understandable. I mean, to the extent that actually, the exterior of the house that you see in the film, also, it isn't the front of Bob's house, because the area that they live, I mean, Bob joked, but it really was sort of no joking matter that he didn't even want to broadcast the fact that he was Jewish in that town. It's a small town, and so for a number of reasons, but the family were also mindful of not. There are clearly people that strongly disagree with this legislation, so we had to be mindful of that also.
I think that's important. Before we close, I just wonder if there's anything that you would like the audience to know.
Absolutely. Yeah, no, that we're having a theatrical release of the documentary. It will be in towards June of May, June of 2020 of this year, 2024. And so if you'd like to screen the film in your community, or if you'd like to organize another screening, or if you'd like just to stay up to date with other screenings around the United States, you can just visit our website at floodprojects.com, and so there'll be ongoing screenings if people are interested. But other than that, I'd just like to thank everyone for coming along, and to thank the festival, and also to thank you for this wonderful chat.
Thank you. It's really been my pleasure, and wonderful to hear the inside of what you thought, because through the whole time I kept thinking, what is it like to be filming this? I mean, I have sat with patients who are dying, so I understand that. But as a filmmaker and someone who is choosing to die rather than just dying naturally, so I really appreciate all that you told us. So thank you so much, Amiel. And just to let everyone know that we thank you all for joining us, the members, the sponsors, the community partners, volunteers, and all of you film lovers for participating in the Miami Jewish Film Festival. Thank you.